Hi everybody, welcome and thank you for coming. A couple of months ago, David Lippman emailed me to tell me that he had just presented at a conference where they used this very cool presentation format called Ignite. He wanted to know if we could do that for one of the faculty lectures in the faculty lecture series, and here we are. Thanks, David, for the idea and for working with the Ignite organization and our faculty to make it happen. There were a lot of technicalities and a lot of bureaucracy, and now it's suddenly very dark in here. Thank you, Hillary Stevens and Jennifer Stump, for making this very round room work for us. And thank you, Denise Yoakum, for supporting the faculty lecture series and for paying for the refreshments from your budget. By the way, there will be light refreshments after the event. Presenters will be sticking around for a bit, so feel free to corner them with your questions and comments. Mostly, thank you to the faculty who boldly jumped right in to do this. You guys are awesome. From the Ignite website, just a little description. Ignite is a geek event in over 100 cities worldwide. At the events, Ignite presenters share their personal and professional passions using 20 slides that auto-advance every 15 seconds. For a total of just 5 minutes. So they auto-advance. These events are filmed and uploaded to the Ignite website for public use. The Ignite motto is, enlighten us, but do it quickly. So open your brains and get ready.
Well, thank you. I'm Blake Sorum. I'm head of the economics department here. Click. And I'm going to be talking about the budget deficit, particularly looking at policies that make it go up and policies that make it come down. And I'm going to make it very political, so you'll either love it or hate it, probably. What is the budget deficit? It occurs when the government spends more than it has in tax revenue. So it goes up for two reasons, basically. One, when government spending goes up, but two, when taxes go down, also cause the deficit. A brief history of the deficit. Back in World War II, we ran huge deficits relative to the size of the economy. Nothing like we've been running the last 30 years. And I'm going to start off just before the Reagan administration. We ran a budget deficit of $41 billion, and Reagan railed against Jimmy Carter and the Democrats for big government. We've got to restore fiscal responsibility to the U.S. government. And how did he do that? Through massive tax cuts. That's got to help. No, it doesn't help. I wish it would help, but it doesn't. It makes deficits go up. So what else did he do? He doubled military spending. That's got to help. No, not only does it not help, if you're for big military, you are for big government. It doesn't matter how much you cut education, the size of military increased. So if you're for big military plus tax cuts, you are increasing budget deficits, not decreasing budget deficits. That is the problem right there, big military and tax cuts. And so the deficits went up in the 80s. Jump into the 90s, the longest expansion in U.S. history. As that was occurring, we increased some taxes, particularly on wealthiest income. So yes, we could have a great economy while we're raising taxes on millionaires. Those policies led to the first surplus in 29 years, with surpluses increasing through 2000. And the projected accumulation of surpluses over the next 10 years was an estimated $5.5 trillion. However, that is Social Security surplus, and in my view, should have been saved for Social Security. Unfortunately, we cut taxes by $3 trillion. You know about the income tax and maybe the estate tax, which have been adjusted. What has not yet been adjusted are the dividend income tax and the capital gains tax, which is why people like Mitt Romney and the Koch brothers pay lower tax rates than I do as a teacher. And I think that is unfair. One example of what I think is the unfairness of it, on one day in 2004, Bill Gates received a check for $6 billion in dividend income, saving over $1 billion in one day. So again, we're back to tax cuts for millionaires combined with big military. Very quickly, we go back to budget deficits. And I think more importantly, the trajectory of the deficits moved from that $5.5 trillion surplus to a projected $2 trillion deficit over the decade, a change of $7.5 trillion. And that is before banks started collapsing. So going to 2008, President Bush signs a $700 billion bank bailout in October 2008. The reason the date's important is because that's the beginning of fiscal year 2009. So President Bush was president almost 4 months into 2009 fiscal year, leaving President Obama with an estimated $1.2 trillion deficit. As President Obama takes office, he clearly contributed to the 2009 budget deficit here with the stimulus package, but the deficit today is actually below the deficit that President Bush handed President Obama, which means it's now been 32 years of presidents where Democrats have brought down the deficit and Republicans have run up budget deficits. And as we go into the talks this year over the budget, I think it's important to look at the dividend income and capital gains tax before we ever think about cutting Social Security. The middle class did not create the budget deficit. Why should they be the ones to pay the cost of it? Thank you.
I'm David Lippman. In case you didn't figure that out. So, hi, I'm David Lippman, and I teach math. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about fair division. This is a topic that bridges math, economics, and psychology, and which sometimes comes up in our Math 107 class. So, fair division is about using math to settle that, but she got the bigger piece and that's not fair argument. It explores the question of how do we split goods between multiple parties with each feeling like the split is fair. To give a quick example, you may have seen this Jif peanut butter commercial. In it, the kids are splitting up some toast and whining, but he can't get the bigger piece. And the mother says, well, Billy gets to cut the toast, but then Mikey gets to choose first. And this is the idea behind what's called the divider-chooser method for two parties. Basically, one person divides the item, and the other person gets to pick first. The chooser is guaranteed to get a piece they view, oops, lost a person, they view as worth at least 50% or a fair share. The divider has every incentive to split the goods equally. So even though they may value the pieces differently, and they've never communicated their preferences with each other, in each person's eyes, they've gotten a fair share. And the division is immune to cheating. So now comes the fun part. What if we've got 4 people? Trying to split up some land, let's say. Your first thought might be, well, let's have one person cut it up and each of the others can choose. Well, that doesn't quite work. So imagine we have somebody cut this up into 4 pieces, and then there's their preferences. So Abby picks piece 4, Brian picks piece 2, and now Chris has no piece that he values as a fair share. That didn't work, right? No fair division there. So instead what we'll do is we'll have each of them declare which pieces they view as a fair share. And in this case, it's possible to allocate them in a way that each person gets a piece they view as 25% as a fair share. And we're done. We have a fair division. But of course, that doesn't always work. So like in this case, Granny cuts up the cake and views each of the pieces as equal. But Jenny and Billy both really think that that last piece is the only one worth a fair share. So what should we do? We have a conflict. Well, we'll go ahead and give Granny one of those 2 pieces that she thinks is a fair share because she divided it, and we'll shove the other 2 pieces back together. So now we have this combined 2 pieces, which Jenny and Billy are both going to view as worth at least 2 fair shares. Then We only got 2 people left, so we can go back to that good old peanut butter commercial and just have them divide it using divider chooser. And we now have a fair division. Now, it's interesting to note that while this process leads to a fair division, it's not necessarily an envy-free fair division. Like back in our land case, Brian there would much rather have had piece 2. And so he's looking over at Chris's piece with envy. It turns out that there are methods to do envy-free fair division methods for multiple players, and they're actually fairly recently developed in math. 1960 was the first one for 3 players, 1995 for an arbitrary number of players. But they do require more cuts than just 2. So there's a lot of other methods for doing fair division. Another big focus is division of discrete goods, like splitting up possessions after a divorce. But we're going to transition a little bit. Fair division is very closely related to game theory, which is the study of strategic decision-making and competition. So here's a little crossover between fair division and game theory. It's called dinner bill poker. And it's a way to split the bill at a restaurant if the people you're going with have all agreed that they're going to split the bill equally. They don't want to have to use a calculator. And it's all going to happen before anyone even sees the bill. So everyone's going to order dinner. And then the first person is going to say what they think everyone should chip in for the bill. So Andy says, I think everyone should chip in $30. The next person can either accept that or propose a lower amount. So here Beth says, I think everyone should only chip in $28. And this continues around the line. Carlos passes, Dennis says $27, Emily passes. So now, whoever bids last, Dennis in this case, goes ahead and collects $27 from each person. And then he goes and pays the bill. If the bill ends up being more than he estimated, then he has to pay the difference. But if it ends up being less than he estimated, he gets to pocket the difference. So as they bid, notice that each person has motivation to not let a high bid pass, because then they'll lose money, and not bid too low, because then they'll lose money. So just like in fair division, the rules of the game reward honesty and fair play and rational play. Of course, whether people actually play rationally, we'll leave to the psychologists.
My name's Dave Rollholt. I'm in the art department. I teach painting and drawing classes in particular. And today I am going to share with you an assignment that I do with my students, but I want to give you a little bit of a historical context to begin. And we're also going to mix in the topic of humor. So I'm going to be speaking on humor in the fine art of what's called trompe-l'oeil. And so here we have an example of a trompe-l'oeil painting with this figure that's busting out of the frames. So first of all, let's get to what trompe-l'oeil is. So in the art world, we like a lot of fancy French terms, I suppose. But basically, in a nutshell, what that means is to fool the eye. And so it requires artists' diligence in copying things like accurate color, proper scale. And it's been around for a long time. So here's a Pompeian painter. Painted this. It survived the volcanic eruption, and it's still here for us to see. And there's been this urge to create things that fool the eye, that are illusions. And so when I first started implementing these historical examples to my classroom, we were painting flat, two-dimensional, life-size representations. But I had a student that came up with, in part, a brilliant idea that I kind of stole like any good artist, and I'll show you that in a moment. But you can see these are some pretty amazing examples. This looks like a dome, but it's actually not a dome. This is all completely painted right through here. And you can see the amazing foreshortening and these other techniques that artists have employed to create these optical illusions. So here's this artist and student I alluded to earlier. She said, hey, I want to paint those lockers. And this was my second quarter of teaching as a graduate student in Colorado. And I said, you know, that's a brilliant idea. I'm going to make everybody pick something around the campus that they have to paint. So this student had the nice opportunity to go in the men's bathroom and had to measure all these little tiny components in order to create a realistic trompe-l'oeil. And so it gets really interesting when you invite your whole painting class into the men's bathroom to have a look at their final project, you know. So Some of them are a little bit more subtle, and that's fun too, because quite often people never get around to actually discovering what's out there, and sometimes they stay up for a long time. So now we move to Pierce College. Here's Samantha Wisdom, and she painted a little kitty cat trapped inside a fire extinguisher, and she's doing well. She's now at UW studying under the very talented Ann Gell. This one was one of my favorites in that it's interactive, so it forces students or passers to try to retrieve that loot right there, their extra $5 treasure. And it's not until people would get right next to grabbing that bill that, oh, they would discover it wasn't real. So I never did have a chance to ask Randy Leifson before he retired what he thought about this one. This is the math lab turned meth lab. So a few people, I'm sure, passed by that one without noticing, but if they did, they might have taken a... Yeah, that's right, exactly. I'm sure that's the main case in point, that trompe-l'oeil painting. So this one actually was there for quite an extended period of time before anybody discovered the alteration. So if you were on campus in 2010, you might have noticed that. It has caused interesting reactions. I have to say, there are a couple places on campus we're no longer allowed to paint these. For example, in the cafeteria, we've had rats and cockroaches make an appearance, and so we've been banned of sorts from the cafeteria. Hopefully we haven't created any traffic accidents outside in the parking lot, but some students have taken this outside, and that's what I really like about this project. It moves the art from the classroom into a venue that everybody can enjoy. So there we go. We have our new presidential candidate, and this was done during the election season, so by a very clever student. So, but anyway, you can see that these are really lighthearted. This is another one that I like. People hit this one several times trying to access the Sky Bridge, but it's actually a man sitting on a toilet there. So it doesn't exactly work like people are hoping, but when they get there. But that was a good one by Zach. And then some students have taken this to another level and worked on a larger scale. So can't beat the Kool-Aid man busting through the wall. But this does bring us to an interesting dialogue in that how is humor looked at in the fine art world. And this is an artist named Wayne White. He did a movie. I don't know if it's still viewable on PBS, but it has been free to view there online. And he's a former art director for Pee-wee's Playhouse and has embarked on a fine art career. And he explores the idea of humor and art. This is another artist. You can watch him on TED Talks, Vic Muniz. He's also responsible for a much more serious movie called Wasteland. But you can see his pre-Columbian coffee maker there. And so he used humor early on in his career, but arguably this is where humor and trompe-l'oeil is alive and well. Not so much the museum, but rather that of the internet museum, if you will. And these are sidewalk art works by Julian Beaver, probably the most well-known trompe-l'oeil artist. But that's all I've got, so thanks for
I think I'm next. Yes, I am. All right. I'm Hillary Stevens, and I'm going to be talking about the cosmic perspective today. I'm in the astronomy and physics department. All right, so on any given night, if you go out to a dark location, there are about 2,000 to 3,000 stars that you can see with your naked eye. And that's only a fraction of the stars out there. And as a matter of fact, it's only a fraction of the stars in the galaxy. So we can actually see our own galaxy called the Milky Way galaxy, also if you go out to a dark location, and it appears as this milky streak across the sky. The Milky Way galaxy has about 100 billion stars in it. This is an example of a region of the sky near the Milky Way where the squares up there are showing you where a telescope called the Kepler telescope is looking at a 100,000 stars in the night sky. So with the telescope, you can see more stars in the sky than you can with your naked eye. And this telescope is looking specifically to see if it can see any planets going around other stars. And if you have a planet going around another star, you get a little mini eclipse, and the light dims just briefly as the planet passes by. And so far, this telescope has seen over 2,700 dips going around stars that might be planets. So it has over 2,700 planet candidates that range anywhere from the size of Earth-like planets to massive Jupiter-like planets.
And the stars that they're going around also have a huge variance in their size. So this shows you the upper right-hand star over there is our sun and Jupiter. And you can see the little black spots are the planets going around those stars and the various sizes of those stars. But what we're really looking for are for planets going around in the sweet spot called the habitable zone, where you can have liquid water on the surface of a planet. And so here you can see our solar system compared to one of these other solar systems that have been found out there. So we're getting really close to finding Earth-like planets inside of a habitable zone where there might possibly be life. But just to put this in perspective, the Kepler mission is looking at 100,000 stars, all right, which is really not that much. The universe is really big, and we have to talk about it in terms of how fast light travels in the universe. So light is traveling at 300 million miles every second, which means it goes about 6 trillion miles in 1 year. So the closest stars to us are about a little over 4 light years away, or 4 times 6 trillion miles. That's a big distance, all right? But it's still not that big compared to the size of the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way galaxy, with its 100 billion stars, is about 100,000 light years across. So that means it takes light 100,000 years to get from one side of the galaxy to the other side of the galaxy. So as we're looking farther away, we're actually looking at things as they were in the past. This is the Andromeda galaxy. It's another galaxy outside of our own Milky Way galaxy that's over 2 million light years away. So when we look at this galaxy right here and the hundreds of billions of stars that are in this galaxy, we're looking at them as they were over 2 million years ago. And another galaxy right here, this one is over 100 million light years away from us. So we're looking at this galaxy as it was 100 million years ago. Turns out that there are a lot of galaxies out there. And we put this telescope out here in space. This is the Hubble Space Telescope outside of the Earth's atmosphere to get some really good images of what's going on out there. So they took this very powerful telescope and pointed it in the sky at a dark region where there were no stars around. Okay, so it's over here in a region by the Big Dipper, in between stars. And you take a little grain of sand, you hold it out at arm's length. That's how big of a patch of sky that this picture was taken in. All right, and this picture right here, now each one of these points of light is no longer a star, but a galaxy with millions to trillions of stars in them each. All right, and this is another picture taken in a different location. So it doesn't matter what direction you look, you see these just galaxies everywhere. And the oldest galaxies in this picture, or the galaxies that are farthest away, the light has been traveling to us for over 13.5 billion years. So if you are looking at this and thinking that you might be insignificant as just a tiny little dust speck, well, you're probably not alone. But I just want to put this in perspective, right? We know we're still finding so much about our own little planet here of Earth. All right, and we've barely moved out at all into the universe. All right, we've sent spacecraft to other planets in our solar system, but we're just beginning to travel out there. All right, about 6 months ago, we sent this rover to Mars, and that's roving around on Mars and telling us more information that we ever possibly knew could exist about that planet. But that's just the next planet over. So we've got a long way to go.
I'm Arkiva Contras. I'm from the Veterinary Technology Program. I'm a licensed veterinary technician, and I'm a certified canine rehabilitation practitioner. I'm going to be talking to you today about a case study of Lewis, the Corgi, and how we were able to use physical rehab to help treat his knee injury and prevent the need for surgery repair. And that's a long slide again. So Lewis is a Corgi, and he is very active. He had an injury to his left cruciate ligament, and he required some veterinary care. Now, when we're talking about humans versus dogs, like humans, dogs have kneecaps called patellas, which are held in place by ligaments, and like humans, dogs can injure their cruciate ligament. So we discussed surgery for Lewis, but his owners had some concerns. He's an older dog, and anesthetic risk increases as a dog ages. He's also a very active dog, and the owners were concerned that he wouldn't do well with the required cage rest that comes with surgery repair. And then finally, there's the expense of a surgery. The typical knee repair can cost anywhere between $1,500 and $2,000 per knee. So we opted to try physical rehab. What our goals for Lewis included were things like comfort and mobility. We wanted to strengthen and stabilize that knee. And since he's an active dog, we wanted to make sure that he could maintain his quality of life. To address the comfort, we added anti-inflammatories and pain medications as necessary. We also had long-term joint supplementations in the form of glucosamine and chondroitin, which helps to replenish the cartilage and the joint fluid. Oh my goodness, that went really fast. The rest we addressed through therapeutic exercises. Now, dogs look at exercise a little bit differently than some humans do, mostly because there are cookies involved. But exercise for dogs also stimulates their mind. It gives them something to focus on. You get undivided attention from whoever's doing the exercises with the dog. And did I mention there are cookies involved? Some of the exercises we did with Lewis included things called sit-stands, basically the human equivalent of a squat. And by placing his injured leg up against the wall while we were doing those exercises, we could track his knee into the proper direction. Doing a cushion walk, having something that's unsteady under his feet, requires some subtle corrections with both the ligaments and the muscles, so that it goes a long way to help stabilize that knee as he's trying to balance as he's walking across. Cavaletti exercises is basically a high step, and if we have him high step over something, he's doing an exaggerated motion in all of the joints and all of his legs. And if we use his owner, she can feel if he's dragging his foot at all. Probably the most popular exercise out there is the cookie stretch. That's good for mobility and flexibility, stretches the spine and so on by having him chase the cookie from hip to hip and then up and down in between his front legs. Then there's the dreaded core work that is involved with any exercise. Working the abs strengthens the legs. A strong core gives you strong legs. And then we would do stretches either up the wall or on a chair, shifting his weight to his back feet, and then requiring those subtle corrections to maintain his balance. We're also getting a core workout there too. The worst part of rehab for Lewis was sitting still long enough that I could do passive range of motion and massage to warm up and cool down. Passive range of motion is basically just flexing and extending the injured leg and bicycling that leg, putting it through all of its range of motion so we can maintain muscle tone and continue gaining mobility. Overall body massage is a good way of keeping all of the other legs healthy. When a dog is injured, they shift weight off to their other 3 limbs, and we want to make sure that they're in good working form while we're continuing with the rehab. The average dog's attention span maxes out at about 20 minutes or so, which is fine because 20 minutes of dog exercise is about the equivalent of an hour of human exercise. So we see really positive results in a really short period of time per session. As far as length of time, twice a week for 4 to 6 weeks, we usually will end up seeing the results we're looking for, or the dog will plateau and will need to reassess. Lewis is a year past his rehab, and as you can see, he's using his foot and he's placing his weight, and we've avoided the need for surgery.
Hello, I'm Mary Russell. I teach anthropology here at the college. One thing I found in teaching anthropology is I often get students and even colleagues who really don't know what anthropology is. So I want to take this opportunity to share a little bit. Oftentimes anthropology really focuses on understanding human diversity, and we'll look at that today, and I'll mention the racial groups just as an example of one thing we do look at. Oftentimes people think of anthropology and they think of classical world, looking at old architecture such as pyramids or treasure hunters, think Indiana Jones, action and adventure. Here's a pharaonic mask, think King Tut was here in Seattle last year. Or they think of Lucy or other hominid fossils that have been found. Lucy was in Seattle a couple of years ago as well, and people have seen this on PBS or National Geographic, Discovery Channel. Or finally, some folks think of white explorers who go out into the jungles and study primitive peoples. And this is actually a picture of some pygmies who live in Central Africa, taken a long time ago. Anthropology is actually a four-field approach to studying humans. There's cultural anthropology, where we focus on contemporary people, linguistic anthropology, looking at the relationship between language and culture, biological anthropology, looking at human origins, and archaeology, that's studying past cultures. Anthropology is a global discipline. We study humans anywhere in the world. Originally, we were studying folks in Africa, Australia, the New World, Asia. Now we study folks also in the US and in Europe. There's a biblical story that talks about dividing people into different groups based upon their languages so they wouldn't be able to communicate with one another. And we do find today that people do live in groups and they do speak different languages. Linguistic anthropologists are interested in studying connections between language, thought, and culture. We know that language is one way that culture is transmitted to the next generation. And we wonder, how strong of effect does the language we learn impact our interpretation of ourselves and other cultures? Archaeologists study the evidence of past human societies. Here's a picture of an excavation taking place in England, where they're systematically looking at a site, looking at old architecture, and looking for objects left behind by peoples who lived there in the past. Cultural anthropologists can compare cultures across time. Here's a picture of a canoe in 1914 amongst the Kwakiutl. We can study how canoes were built and how they were significant to the tribes. And then just a couple years ago, a picture of our own local groups and how those identities are created. We can also compare how people live in different parts of the world. For example, how do folks in the Kalahari Desert get food? How do they know what is food? How do they create social organization based upon that? We can compare it across space to hunter-gatherers who lived in the Pacific Northwest. How did they get food? What foods were available to them at what times of the year? And how did that affect their social organization as well as their beliefs about the world? Biological anthropologists are interested in human origins. For example, humans are the only primate that walks on 2 feet habitually. What changes to the skeleton had to take place to allow us to do that? So we also are interested in genetics. Here's a human chromosomes from a human male, 23 pairs of chromosomes. Genetics has significantly helped our understanding of what it means to be human, and genetics have also established that there's only one human species. At one time, some scientists thought, because of human migration patterns, that different species developed in Africa or Asia or in Europe. In fact, genetics disproves that. We know that as people moved out of Africa, they moved into areas and they had different exposures to sunlight. So we had different skin colors that existed. We have darker skin for folks who live nearer the equator, or their ancestors lived nearer the equator. And people who lived at northern latitudes, or we had ancestors that lived in northern latitudes, had lighter skin. Biologically, we understand that this happened because of vitamins. Vitamin D is absorbed by the sun, so you need to have relatively light skin in order to absorb enough vitamin D to live successfully in a region. And you need to have enough dark skin where you live in areas that you're exposed to a lot of sun in order to protect your stores of folate. So race is not a biological reality. In fact, it's a cultural construct, and it's constructed historically and even today through policies and laws that allow some groups to do some things and other groups not to do those things. So in sum, anthropology is a holistic discipline. We look at the past in order to understand the present. We also look at biology and culture. We look at how culture affects our biology. And we are able to look at human diversity, not just in terms of skin color, but in terms of a lot of other social variables as well. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to apologize for my voice. It's going to be cracky. I might cough, so my slides will go slower. I'm Melanie Rasmussen. I'm here in the math department, and I'm here to talk to you today about Chutes and Ladders, the children's game, and its relationships to graph theory and Markov chains. So before I talk about Chutes and Ladders, let's talk about its origins. It was derived from a game, an ancient Indian game called Snakes and Ladders. So here's Snakes and Ladders. It's kind of scary that big, isn't it? So Snakes and Ladders was represented vices, which were the snakes, which would lead you down a path of destruction, versus the ladders, which represented virtuous qualities that would lead you up towards a path of higher living. In the Milton Bradley version, there's children, and the children are having different behaviors. For example, there's a little boy here fishing in a no fishing zone, and if you land there, you go down this ladder, and you're getting kicked away from the fishing. Just like here, he's pulling the hair, you go down the ladder. And so how do we play the game? It starts off with rolling a die. You roll a die, and there's 6 different possibilities of what you could roll, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And so we calculate the probability of rolling any given number. So the probability that I roll a number is 1/6. You have 1 out of 6. That corresponds to a move on the board, and you can move ahead 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 spaces. I told you my slides would be slower, didn't I? I doubled it. You know that, right? Okay. So let's talk about how that relates to graph theory. In graph theory, we start off by looking at these dots, and they're vertexes. And they can also be thought of as states. And the line segment is the edges that connect the states. This loop here, for example, is coming back to the same state. For example, you keep repeating something over and over again, you're staying in the same state. There's multiple edges. You can go around in circuits, or you can take a whole entire path around a situation before coming back to where you started. Markov chains is another level of mathematics where it takes the 2 different states that you're in, and it's the path that it takes to get there, and we can associate a probability with that path. Excuse me. Now, if you wanted to talk about something non-mathematical like the weather, I'll turn it into a math problem for you. Let's talk about the weather. And we'll start here, and we'll say, okay, let's talk about the weather. Is it going to be a high or a low pressure day? High and low pressure are different events. The probability that transitions from high to low or low to high also occurs. If it's high pressure, is it going to be sunny or rainy or cloudy? And we know that in Washington State, all of these occur at the same time, so I should have put in a line that transitioned between all 3 states. Or you'd rather talk about something on TV, well then we're going to talk about rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock. And I do have this on here twice because I was going to try to go through and explain this to you, and I'll try one more time. Spock vaporizes rock, rock crushes scissors, scissors cut paper, paper disapproves Spock, Spock smashes the scissors, scissors decapitate lizard, lizard poisons Spock, and Spock vaporizes the rock. This again is graph theory and Markov chains. So then if we want to bring it to something a little more applicable like the game we started talking to, then let's go back and roll that die. We roll the dice 1 time, and we know that we're going to move ahead somewhere between 1 and 6 spaces. And when we roll this, we may or may not have an opportunity to go up a chute or down a ladder. When we roll that die, that's the first state here, and we roll and we can go off into 6 different directions, and each of these have the same probabilistic count. And so this is just 1 roll. We have to roll again, and again, and again, and again. And we can use probability to decide when this game is going to end, if it will ever end. And for some of you who know some mathematics, we're going to see a fractal pattern emerging. This is just 1 branch off of 1 roll and 1 branch off of that roll. So if we take that and we talk about rolling, we start here. If I roll a 1, and I'm planting some, I get to reap the benefits of planting and eat that, and I'm already at space number 8. From here, I can roll again, and ultimately, though, you'd have to figure out what's the fastest way and the slowest way through the game. Rolling a 1 is what a lot of people think is the fastest way, but actually, if you make it over to space 28, that is the longest ladder, and you get to space 84. So you can figure out the probability of winning in the fewest number of rolls. So then, of course, if you're an administrator in here, this is for you. Let's talk about student success in math and how that applies to chutes and ladders and probability and statistics. Of course, we all know that in math, or in life in general, there are a certain number of chutes and ladders. For example, if you don't go to student orientation, you're going to fall down the chute. And if you do go, you get to climb up the ladder. And of course, the one we know, we need accelerated developmental math education versus avoiding it altogether. And basically, I'm just here to tell you that the probability of success without math is just pretty much zero.
Hi, I'm Terry Morand, and my slides go normal speed. I teach world languages and interpreting. I'm also a certified medical interpreter and social service interpreter for Spanish. Aloha, peheo oko, e como mai, e noho mai, e vala'au. E hana me ke haha ha'a, kuka kuka. Hello. How are you? Welcome. Come, sit, and talk. Let us work with humility. Let's talk story. My apologies to any Hawaiian speakers here. Does this phrase mean language is important or language issues? You decide. There'll be a quiz at the end. I chose to begin by speaking Hawaiian because I wanted to expose you all, or at least most of you, for a moment to a language barrier. Was that a comfortable situation for you? Language is a doorway to relationships, to learning, to services, to commerce, to justice, to social standing, to identity. We live in a nation of immigrants in a global age. We should value language skills and language learning. We should also respect the challenges of learning a new language. There's an old joke. What do you call someone that speaks 2 languages? Bilingual. What do you call someone who speaks 3 languages? Good. Okay. What do you call someone that speaks many languages? Yeah, or you can call them a polyglot, okay? What do you call someone that speaks only 1 language? American. Yes, very good. We should value language skills, language learning, and language access, but as a society, as a country, we don't. Education pays lip service to valuing language skills with immersion schools for an elite few and language requirements for university admission or graduation. But kids that bring a language other than English to school are stigmatized. Their home language is not seen as the asset to the country it could be. It's not nurtured. We should be expanding and supporting these students' knowledge of their home languages so that they, their communities, and society as a whole can benefit. And benefits there are. For example, every day scientists are discovering more and more reasons that bilingualism is good for the brain. It both enhances learning in younger people and staves off Alzheimer's in old age. At the community college level, most of our beginning language students are past the best age to begin learning a second language. We make it worse by expecting them to acquire in 10 weeks what is taught in 1 full year of high school. Immigrants and the deaf and hard of hearing face numerous language barriers every day. Imagine trying to explain to a doctor what's wrong with your sick child through signs or by pointing at pictures. The Americans with Disabilities Act addresses the language access barriers of the deaf and hard of hearing. But does the law address the language barrier faced by immigrants? In fact, yes. No person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. While any recipient of federal funds is responsible for upholding Title VI, it is much less enforced than the ADA, despite the fact that a grievance can be filed by anyone, not just the victim. I believe in these three things: quality language access for those with limited English proficiency, a cultivation of the language skills of immigrants and their families, language instruction that starts at a developmentally appropriate age. Thank you. May blessings ever be with you. Goodbye. Mahalo. E pili mau na pomaika I ia oi. Ahui ho.
So instead of saying either it's a cult or not, that hasn't been useful for me. But I realize that most organizations are to some extent, and so I'm going to use a couple scales to show you how to sort it out. The first one is language. Oh no, excuse me, let me tell you this first. The reason my social psychology book, I use this Chaldean, he like I writes beautifully, all my life I can admit it freely that I am a patsy. I study social influence because I am influenced by society greatly. I love it. He's my favorite psychologist. So the first scale is language, and all cults, many groups create new language. This was very recent. John Stewart was talking about one of the spin doctors, and he says the Church of Scientology called. They want their deliberately obfuscating words back. Examples of language, you won't get to read them all. I want to highlight in Scientology, if you began to read that, you would actually understand all of those words and would make sense the same way you use English today. In Landmark the Forum, which some people call a cult, other people don't, they talk about deciding the difference between what somebody said and what somebody did. It's an important distinction. And it's actually useful, although it leans towards a cult. So, are you in a cult? If people rename things that you already know, it's dangerous. If the member's response to the cult and you ask them what it means says, oh, well, you wouldn't understand, that's very dangerous. The second scale is about proselytizing. Really, it's two questions. How do you carry your message, and why do you carry your message? And I think the second one is the subtle piece here. That'll be really useful. In this way, for example, Landmark, the Forum, another one, the in-class hours were emotionally exhausting, but it was the breaks that killed me on every break. And by the way, I went through this. This is another person's report. Said that they always wanted you to call and tell somebody, go get them, tell them what's going on, why is it useful. Go immediately, even before you've bought into it, explain. So if your value in the group depends on how many people you bring in, and it means to bring them in now, you may be in a cult. If, on the other hand, your job is to go out there and share your experience because you believe in it, because you value it, you may not be. This is a fascinating, difficult example. There is a site that says AA is a cult. There are people who believe it's a useful support group. They have a tradition. Our public relations is based on attraction, not promotion. And the argument is, I think when it runs well, is that when you go to talk to a newcomer, it is not about keeping them sober. It is by making you sober, staying there. The third scale is the difference between family, nation, and religion. I'd argue these are the three major social groups. And if you're in control and you want control, you're probably one of these trying to deal with the other two. The most classic historical example is the Jehovah's Witnesses, because they are one of the religious groups that do not very clearly, very specifically align themselves with any national identity. It gets them into trouble all the time. And just to show, I want to say it was April 1st, 1933, very early on in Hitler's reign. Jehovah's Witnesses were attacked, and that is the mention. Attack groups that don't integrate, that don't agree with you, have the kids inform on the parents, and then later on redefine what a real family is, what a real religion is within you. I got this one in there because this is probably where it started. I read this book when I was maybe 12. I don't know if you remember Brian Piccolo, Brian's song, God is first, my family is second. It's a nice way of saying you can integrate them. You do not have to make one choose over the other, although some of us do. The other dimension I mentioned briefly is this time for distance. I think college is fascinating because it forces us to sit with complex questions. I pulled this out of a church on 6th Street just a couple days ago. We embrace the big questions instead of demanding you agree to the small answers. That, to me, is a very anti-cult kind of message. Last few slides, I'm going to think about whether or not you believe higher education is a cult. I think when we rename the obvious, and I'm just going to pick on psychology because I know the examples. I'm going to let you do it for yourself. The examples here. And then this proselytizing. Some of us are out there saying everybody should be a psych major. I think some other majors are decent, right? We're better. Psychology is a hub science. That's a quote from somebody who thinks psychology, a psych teacher who thinks psychology is the most important science. Okay. Family, Nation, Religion. This is from a great essay by Bell Hooks called Close to Home, Class and Education. Often I tell students from poor and working class backgrounds, right? If you believe that schools separate you from your past, it will. Does it integrate or separate? Leave with a little bit of levity. This was recently, July, August 2009, Mother Jones, where they went in again to landmark the forum, and then at the end of it, he gives you a nice little scale, and he puts all the different cults on 2 different scales, from prophet to prophet, and to get with the program, that is the more common sense ones and kooky. And you see Scientology gets to pop up twice, but if you've watched the ad on the Super Bowl, perhaps he's entirely wrong, I don't know. But we've got everybody from Oprah to Amway. If we have another Ignite event, I'm going to ask you the next question, that is, would you want to be in a cult? Because I think to some extent the answer is yes. I think Duke basketball is, I think the Apple culture, and I think Google have a cult-like atmosphere to some extent that makes it useful and productive and not damaging and dangerous. Thank you.